if you're at that domestic level in the US, gravel is where you need to be if you want to make a career out of it. Are they paying too much attention to marginal gains when they should be
so entertaining to listen to?
Honestly, there's the whole range. I get pretty geeked out about marginal gains, and I don't think there's anything wrong with
the reality of owning a gravel bike in Ireland or the UK is.
This is no offense to Lachlan.
Is the gap that big? Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Dylan, welcome to the Roadman Cycling Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I would say you're on the podium in terms of YouTubers, cycling YouTubers. Have you checked the stats?
On the podium. I mean, I don't know about that. There's a lot of us individual cycling YouTubers are kind of around the 100,000 to 200,000 subscriber range. And then, of course, there's GCN, which is way off the front.
I always count GCN, though.
I mean, you can't even compete with them because they're basically a corporation. So.
Yeah, and they're also clean shorts. They're there's no, I think it's, I don't know, when I look at traditional media, I look at the news, I look at, a lot of traditional media outlets, at times, not so much in the cycling space, but at times I actively feel those outlets are lying to me, that there's hidden agendas in, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, whereas at least with individual creators, be they podcasters or YouTubers, I don't watch your stuff all the time and think, oh, Dylan's definitely right. But I never watch it and think, Dylan is deliberately lying to me. I don't feel like you're deliberately misleading me. I think you represent information to the best of your knowledge at the time you create the video.
Yeah. And let me just say, I don't think I'm definitely right about what I say. I'm very cautious about, speaking in absolutes. And I hope this comes across in my videos, when I'm talking about the scientific consensus on whatever I'm talking about. I usually try to say, there's some evidence that suggests this. There's some evidence that suggests this. I feel like the balance of evidence goes this way, or there's not enough evidence. But instead of saying this is correct, I'm usually trying to talk about the balance of evidence and where I think it's leading. So I hope that comes across.
Yeah, you land pretty evenly most of the time. I remember I had a podcast with Dr. Lat Mansour. He was one of the sports scientists involved in HVMN Ketone Company at roughly the same time you dropped the video on ketones. And I hadn't watched your video on ketones prior to doing my research. And I watched it and I was like, right, now I hope he's just not on a totally, he's ever finding a bunch of research that I haven't found. And now I'm going to have to go back and research this all again. And it was basically the same. So I was like, all right, this is pretty comforting to know. You're always going to find studies that, if you want to go down the rabbit hole, that will back up whatever assumption you have. And then you have to start going, well, who funded these studies? How impartial are these studies? It's a quagmire.
Yeah. I mean, I hear a lot of people say, you can find a study to support any opinion that you have. And then there you go. Again, that's why I go back to what is the balance of evidence, looking at meta-analysis, looking at the studies as all the research on a certain topic instead of just one study, because absolutely, if you just look at one study and you cherry pick that one study to support what you already thought, as opposed to looking at what the research as a whole on this certain topic says, you can definitely get led to the wrong conclusion.
And, I have the chance to chat with a lot of World Tour riders, physiologists and stuff on the podcast. And an interesting thing about the peer-reviewed data and studies that, the masses are so obsessed with, where's the data to show this? Jumbo Visma don't care about the effect of ketones on 500 athletes. They care about the effect of ketones on Primoz Roglic. That's it. They're not testing the entire populace and going, well, what's the 45-year-old's 100 kilogram rider? How's it affecting him in the last hour of his Fondo? They just don't care.
Yeah, they also don't care to let other teams know what the effect of ketones are. Yeah. You know what I mean? They're not doing whatever research they're doing. They're not doing it out of, trying to bring knowledge to the sport. They're trying to win races.
Cycling, when I look at it now, it seems like everything is merging into one. There used to be these quite well separated, delineated groups. We had roadies who never really got their ankles dirty in, some outliers like Wout and MVP had ride cross in the winter and everyone think they're freaks. And then you definitely didn't ride mountain bike. Now I'm looking around this room and I have a road bike, gravel bike, and a mountain bike. And I'm like, what am I? I raced a mountain bike race 2 weeks ago, my first ever mountain bike race. Some of the wildest shit I've ever seen. Like, there's some cowboys in them mountain bike races. I had a bit of punch to get into the single track first, and then I just roadblocked it. I just
You were that guy.
Like,
you were that guy.
I'm on your right.
Oh man, you're probably pissing off a lot of mountain bikers out there.
It couldn't have been a worse course for me to annoy people on, because you get through the single track, so they'd kill themselves, like some real kamikaze, Evil Knievel shit to try and pass me on the single track. But then we got back onto a dirt road climb, and so I'm passing the same guys who just risked life and limb to pass me on the single track. I passed them again, and it's this whole thing. But it's a totally different sport, and I was so aware when I got into it how little I knew. Like, a buddy of mine hit me up afterwards, and he's like, "Oh, what pressure did you run your rear suspension?" And I was like, "You're meant to run pressure in your rear suspension."
Nice. Yeah.
How do you figure this stuff out when you're a total newbie in it?
Oh man, I mean, I don't know. I started mountain biking, and I've been mountain biking since I was 12 years old, and I'm 28 years old now. So a long time. And I don't know, I guess you learn it over time. Some people are a lot more geeky than others. For example, you're talking about pressure and suspension. I set my suspension, but I wouldn't call myself a suspension nerd. There are suspension nerds out there that they really geek out about their suspension. I don't consider myself one of those. I'm probably more of a tire nerd. Anybody who listens to one of the two podcasts that I have talking about tires, like every single podcast. So
what's your go-to for pressure on suspension?
I think that it's going to change depending on what shock you have, but I think I have 150 PSI in my rear shock, which is roughly, I weigh 150 pounds. So they recommend that you put the pressure at the same amount as your weight. But again, it's going to depend based on what shock you have.
Yeah. Cause I found myself bottoming out quite a bit. Now that's obviously say had very little pressure in it. Stock pressure is running, whatever came from the factory. That was the pressure I was going with. I'm blown away though, but your scientific approach to gravel racing. And I know most of your audience, I'm sure you can dive deeper, chatting a little bit off air about just how intricate YouTube is in terms of analytics. Like, I'm sure you can dive deep and get a sense of who is watching your videos. But I think big data, we mainly know who's watching this stuff. It's the majority of riders aren't World Tour top end riders. They're a vast minority. I always wonder with the push towards marginal gains and gravel, which is so entertaining to listen to, but is the majority of your audience, are they majoring in minor things? Yeah,
like, are they paying too much attention to marginal gains when they should be getting off the couch and riding their bike? Is that what you're asking?
Just not ordering like a chicken curry 4 nights a week.
Sure. I mean, I think there, honestly, so from the comments that I get on my YouTube channel, I think there's the whole range. I think there's people who, I've had comments from people who say, I don't even ride bikes, but I just enjoy your videos. And I have had comments from World Tour riders actually on my videos. I think Adam Hansen left a comment on one of my videos once, and that was cool to see. So there's the whole range. And I get pretty geeked out about marginal gains, and I don't think there's anything wrong with having a bit of fun with marginal gains, even when there's a lot of fitness being left on the table. Like, you could ride your bike an extra 2 hours a week, as well. But I don't think there's anything wrong with geeking out about marginal gains.
Do you think you have single-handedly slayed the spirit of gravel?
I hope so, man. I'm getting real sick of the spirit of gravel conversation. I think the spirit of gravel was born in the US. I don't know if you guys have a spirit of gravel over there.
Not so much, yeah. Our scene isn't as developed as yours. And I think it's something that in Ireland, and I'm based in Ireland and the UK, I'll talk broadly about them because we're roughly the same sort of population and topography of the landscapes. When we watch your gravel races like Unbound, it's these amazing flat meadows and prairies. The reality of owning a gravel bike in Ireland or the UK is you're going up the side of a mountain. So it's a totally different requirement. It's not as inclusive. Like, one of the draws of gravel is it's inclusive. We can all ride it together. But honestly, like if you're not probably at least a Cat 2 on the road to make that transition over to gravel in Ireland or the UK, you're riding up some pretty steep pitches on off-road.
Interesting.
And it's not that enjoyable and it's not that inclusive. It's quite exclusionary based on the terrain. But so many people just are fascinated with these YouTube videos of, you know, Belgian waffle rides in dirty Kansas that they get mesmerized, and now everyone has a gravel bike.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, so it depends on the course here. I mean, we have such a variety of terrain in the US. You could have rolling hills in prairies like at Unbound, or you could have quite steep climbing terrain like Crusher and the Tusher, which is part of the Lifetime Grand Prix, is basically for the pros, it's an hour-long climb to start. You drop down, you do a small little loop in the valley there, and then it's an hour and a half climb to finish. So I don't know how inclusive that is, but you know,
so you just give Keegan the prize money before they start.
Oh, they should. They should. It's the perfect. It's every race is good for Keegan, but I think that race he won by over 10 minutes last year. It was ridiculous.
Jeez, he knocked shit out of Lachlan over in Cape Epic.
Yeah. Yeah, we were talking about that on my podcast too. So this is no offense to Lachlan. Lachlan beat me at every single race that he didn't have a mechanical at last year. Super good rider. But man, if I was Keegan, like I don't, and you know, just trying to decide who to go to Cape Epic with. And it's like, okay, you know, we can get Lachlan to go with you. I'd just be like, man, I'm going to stay here in Arizona and train, you know?
Is the gap that big? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that had Keegan been with either Blevins or Matt Beers and that was their team, I think he would have won. Cause he's just so, I mean, I just came from Sea Otter Classic and he won Sea Otter. Blevins was there. He's just such a strong rider. I don't think there's any reason why he can't win Cape Epic if he has the right teammate.
Not presupposing his motivation, but Lachlan's such a huge brand that there's maybe a brand building element for Keegan and ticket books with sponsors to go and do that with Lachlan.
Yeah, I mean, definitely could. It's interesting. Cape Epic, most of the time, the teams are on they're on the same bike. They've got all the same sponsors. You know, Blevins and Matt Beers were both on Specialized, and Lachlan and Keegan, I think the only sponsor that they have in common is Rafa, which maybe Rafa is the one that funded it. So yeah, I mean, that could definitely be the case.
But I've had Alex Hales on the podcast a couple of times, and it was interesting chatting to him while he was under contract with EF. And then he's like, get me back on like when my contract expires and we'll have a totally different chat. So really? When the contract expired. And he said it was so difficult. So you're going to, you know, an Unbound and everyone's like, oh, why is Alex Hales not in the top 10? Or why is he not in the break? Why is he not in the top 5? But he said the reality of being with EF, it meant that because him and Lachlan have become this brand, that Whoop would have a commercial they wanted to shoot in the Swiss Alps. So the team would be like, oh, send Alex over there. So he's flying to the Swiss Alps and sitting in like an ice cold bathtub trying to do some advert for Whoop. And then they'd be like, okay, an investment banker in Munich wants us to do a ride and he's a big contributor to the team. Oh, send Alex. So he's like, it could be 2 weeks before one of these races, just bouncing around Europe, going to these, you know, sponsor gigs. And then he comes to the race with very little proper training done, real bad nutrition, late nights, travel, not a leg. And so while technically World Tour, he said the last couple of years of his contract, he didn't know what hat he was. He didn't know if he was the mascot, if he was some sort of member of staff, or if he was a rider. I'd imagine Lachlan's kind of in that position at the moment where maybe his form doesn't represent his best winning Tour of Utah style form.
Yeah, I mean, that could very well be the case. He's still in great form, but there's clearly a difference between Lachlan's form and Keegan's form, at least with the contract that Lachlan has right now. I mean, you could be absolutely right about that. I'm sure EF has him doing a lot of things.
Well, like, I'm going to Kenya for a migration gravel race this year. I'm sure he's still going to kick absolute shit out of me out there. So it's all relative.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's all relative.
Let's talk some geeky wind tunnel and how you did manage to kill the spirit of gravel, if it ever did exist in the first place. You had your gravel bike, or I'm on the same gravel bike as you at the moment, the Factor Ostro. It's a sweet machine. How are you finding yours?
I love it. And this is 100% the truth. This is not the sponsorship talking. If I could have any gravel bike on the market and I wasn't sponsored and I had to, pay for it with my own money, I would get the Ostro Gravel. And it's simply because it's basically the Ostro, which is an Aero road bike with more tire clearance. It's like everything you want from an aerodynamic gravel bike. They checked all the boxes. And then on top of that, they've got the cleanest Aero bar cockpit setup for a gravel bike that I see on the market. So I'm super happy with it.
Sean Kelly, one of the GOATs, he has a great quote about the best bike you'll ever ride. It's the one you're currently paid to ride.
Yeah.
We're talking bringing the gravel bike into the wind tunnel, and I honestly didn't understand this until I started taking part in some gravel races. Last year I kind of dipped the toes. This year I'm more of an expansive calendar, and in so many of the races compared to Cat 1 road races, it's almost like a time trial. The amount of air I'm hitting, the amount of time actually in the wind on my own, it makes such a difference to think about aero, as opposed to just rolling around in the pack in a peloton where you're getting shelter. And those moments you are sticking your head in the wind, they're race winning moments. But on the gravel bike, Rift last year, I had a mechanical and my Di2 froze. I would say I was 85 to 90% of the race pushing wind on my own. It was not fun.
Yeah, you're going to be pushing wind a lot more in a gravel race than you are in a road race. And honestly, the speeds of these gravel races is getting so high. I'm sure most of your audience uses kilometers per hour. They're 35 to 40 kilometers per hour at some of these gravel races now. So, it's a huge factor. And I would say that out of all the marginal gains, it's the biggest factor, over weight, tire rolling resistance, drivetrain efficiency. Aero is the most important one for most gravel races, in my opinion.
You're kind of a self-proclaimed, and if you go into your YouTube channel, there's so many good videos on tire choice, tire size, and it seems to be a conversation that I had Sophia Gomez on a couple of weeks ago, and she said it's just like every week people are like, what tire is he using today? What tire is he using today?
Yep.
What's the considerations when someone, because we're kind of getting over in Europe, and I'm aware that we have like even 40% of our listeners are US as well, so it's coming into gravel season right now, if not started in quite a few places. When someone's looking at their event and they're thinking to themselves, okay, what tires should I choose for this event? What considerations are you taking into mind?
Yeah, I mean, there's all the typical ones. How much road is there? How much gravel is there? How chunky is the gravel? How much climbing, how much descending is there, single track, all of that. But I'm going to be honest. I think that the industry in general has gravel tire size wrong right now. And I'm gonna be referencing how mountain biking and road cycling has come a long way in their tires in the past few years. 20 years ago, roadies were on 20 millimeter tires. What were you on when you were racing?
I did a time trial with a 19 on the front and a 21 on the back, and that was like the idea then. Like you mixed up these tire choices, but 21 to 23 was pretty standard for criteriums.
Yeah,
and always 140 psi. Like you didn't even question that. Always
140 psi. Yep. So now look where the World Tour teams are at now. I mean, a lot of them are on 28s now, and they're running 70 psi. So it's quite a bit different on the mountain bike side. Guys used to run 1.9, 2.0 tires. Now, now Nino's only on 2.4s. Like that's all he runs. So, tires in both mountain bike and road have just gotten wider and wider and wider, and it's because it's faster. And I think that we're just going to see the same thing happen in gravel. Gravel tires are going to get wider and wider and wider, and it's because it's faster. And this isn't that hard to test. I don't know why more people don't do this. All you have to do is go to a section of gravel, ride it at a certain power output, switch tires, ride it at the same power output, and then you'll be surprised by how much faster you go when you put the wider tires on. This blows people's mind when I tell them this, but
these homemade tests are unbelievable. I was getting into time trialing back in the day when I was trying to make my way through cycling, and I was coming through as a broke student, so I had very little cash. Definitely wind tunnel testing. It's not very accessible now. It was a lot less accessible like 7, 8, 9 years ago. I just got a bunch of TT helmets from all my friends, went up to the top of an incline, locked myself into position, got a push start from my buddy in helmet A, marked it with chalk down the bottom where I stopped rolling, came back up, same position, same push, mark it in chalk with helmet B. It's pretty rudimentary, but you can draw some conclusions from that.
Like, yeah, I'm not saying this is perfect science by any means. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying if you want to have a rough idea of whether something is faster or slower, you can test it. You don't just have to guess or just look at what the competition is running. I think what most people do is they just look at what the competition is running and say, okay, I'll run the same thing because they must be right.
But so there's so many buckets there. You're talking about, percentage of tarmac versus gravel, how technical it is, or in terms of how sharp it is. Puncture resistance, does it need sidewall puncture resistance? But do these tire choices then fall into a number of buckets for you that you have 2 or 3 go-to tire choices, or are you literally playing with 15 or 20 different tire choice options?
I have a favorite gravel tire right now that I use for the vast majority of gravel races. I won't use it for every single gravel race, but my go-to tire is the Specialized Pathfinder Pro, and they just started making it in a 47 millimeter, and that's what I've been running. It's probably what I'll run for 85% of the gravel races I do this year. And then for some of the other races that maybe have more road, I might run the Challenge Strada Bianchi in the 40 millimeter because it's quite a fast tire, but it punctures easy. So I don't have 20 different tires I'm choosing from, but it's more that I have a select few that I really like. And I don't have a tire sponsor, by the way. So I try a bunch of different tires and I will give you my honest opinion on them.
Is there a big advantage to not having a tire sponsor?
Yeah, the big advantage is that you can run the best tire. I actually kind of feel bad for certain riders that have certain tire sponsors, to be honest with you, because it seems to me that there are some companies that are really nailing it on their mountain bike tire and really dropping the ball on their gravel tire, and then vice versa. There's some companies that are nailing it on the gravel, dropping the ball on the mountain bike. The Lifetime Grand Prix has both mountain bike and gravel. And some riders, I just feel bad for them that they have to run these certain tires for certain races. So
your Pathfinder, say Pathfinder 44 is your go-to?
47.
47. So you're embracing this wide already.
I test this. I test this and it's faster. And that blows people's mind. When you tell them 47, it blows their mind. They're like, there's no way that's faster. There's no way that's faster. Try it for yourself.
There's a call to action for listeners now. What are you running inside it? Are you going with sealant? Are you going with inserts? Mm-hmm. What's your game day setup?
Yeah, I run the Silca tire sealant. To be honest, I think that it's probably the most puncture resistant sealant on the market. There's trade-offs with that, though. It does dry out quickly, but for a race day sealant, it works amazing. And then I do Vittoria tire inserts. So when you're running low pressure, which you should run low pressure because low pressure is not only more comfortable, it's faster. But when you run that low pressure, you do run the risk of hitting the rim and potentially getting a puncture.
And Silca have that cool, I'm sure you know about it for listeners, the cool tire pressure calculator up on their website.
Yeah, it's amazing how well that thing works. I'll test different pressures as well, and I'll start with what Silca tells me to run, and then I'll drop it a few psi, and I'll raise it a few psi, and usually the Silca tire pressure calculator is pretty close.
What's your strategy if you do flatten a race? What are you bringing with you?
I got a Dynaplug and a CO2. I'm going to be honest, I rarely bring a tube with me because usually in a gravel race, if you have to put a tube in, you're going to get another flat and your race is kind of over. I don't recommend that for people. I think people should bring a tube, but I usually don't.
Have you tried Muck-Off's BAM product?
I have not. I've not heard about this.
I've been playing around with it. It's pretty cool. It's a sealant and a CO2 all in one canister. So it's just, you literally have it strapped to the back of the gravel bike. I'm not sure if it's application on a race day, because I guess you're going to have fresh sealant in anyway. So if you get a slice,
it's kind of like fix a flat on a car, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But like out training where I'm typically running wheels that maybe the sealant's a little bit drier than it should be, and I get a flat and the sealant doesn't catch it, you just hit this and it's like fresh coat of sealant and the CO2 all in one go. And it's like, boom. If that doesn't get you home, it's like taxi.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah. I've only started it like 2-3 months ago, and it's pulled me out of it just saves your day. Because like, you know, when you're, it's great having a tube with you and stuff, but it's fucking sealant everywhere, all over your hands, all over your clothes. Trying to pop that thing back on the rim. It's like, your day is ruined.
You know, speaking of Muck-Off, I don't know if you caught the series that I did with Adam Caron of Zero Friction Cycling.
No, I haven't seen it. I'll check it out.
The Australian guy. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, he's just talking about drivetrain efficiency. He's talking about, he tests different lubricants and all of that. But he talks about Muck-Off as one of these brands that their marketing claims don't line up with his test results. And
this is their ludicrous lube. Are you talking about this? Their one purportedly Ghana used it for the world Aero record.
So what he does is he tests for longevity, and he puts the lubricant on the chain, and then he sees how long it takes the chain to wear. Because if the chain is wearing quickly, that means there's a lot of friction in the drivetrain. So not only does a fast lubricant save you watts, but it also increases the lifespan of your drivetrain. But whenever he tests the Muck-Off products, the drivetrain does not last long. It wears quickly, which means there has to be friction in the system. So he's very skeptical of Muck-Off's marketing claims.
So was they're not publishing their data, or they're not showing how? I've never dug into it too deep.
You should have him on the podcast. I don't know off the top of my head here, but he would be a great guest to have on the podcast, because he can go on and on about this nerdy drivetrain efficiency stuff forever. Hopefully the listeners are into that, but yeah.
And it does make such a difference. Like, there's full podcasts out there. Like, anytime I listen to Josh from Silka, it seems like he has endless conversations about chain lubes versus waxes, and it's like,
crazy.
How many hours can you talk on this subject so passionately?
I know. Yeah. So Josh has had Adam on the podcast, and if you go and listen on the Marginal Gains podcast, if you go and listen to those episodes, it is amazing how long they can talk about chain lube. I mean, hours.
Like, I suppose we better touch on it since we're on the subject. But do you have a go-to chain? I've been rocking the Ceramic Speed UFO one. How many watts am I giving away there?
No, you're not. You're probably not giving away any watts. That's a great one. That one, and then also I use Silka's wax chain as well. I've got a Shimano drivetrain on my gravel and road bikes. So the Shimano Dura-Ace chain is very fast, but I've got a SRAM drivetrain on my mountain bike. And instead of running a SRAM chain, which is notoriously slow, I'll run a KMC usually.
What's the deal with SRAM? Like, the dogs on the street know SRAM make the slowest chains in the world. Surely their head of product is aware of this.
Yeah, I don't know what the deal is. I don't know why they can't figure that out. And what's baffling too is that the higher end SRAM chains, the SRAM red chains, seem to be slower than the SRAM force chains. So if you have a SRAM drivetrain and you need to run that SRAM chain, go with the force chain. Don't go with the red chain.
We do have that weird phenomenon in other areas of cycling as well, where you look at helmets and there's probably an inverse correlation between the amount of cash you spend on a helmet and how aerodynamic it is. Like, the really cheap helmets with the really shit ventilation, I've seen so many studies that they perform quite well. And as we started innovating, we innovated more around safety and ventilation for a long time than we did aerodynamics. So we actually lost a lot of those aero properties.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. That's a point that Josh brought up when I was talking to him too. Yeah, some of these super high ventilated helmets I mean, that's not a very aerodynamic shape at all. So, and I think they're starting to realize that, because there are so many Aero helmets on the market. But helmets is one of those areas where it's very individual. So just because one helmet is faster on one person does not mean it's going to be faster on you. And it's very hard. So that makes it very hard to say that one helmet is the fastest helmet, right? It's just very individual.
Well, this is why I'm so skeptical of these marketing claims from Specialized. We're making the fastest helmet in the world. Like, on the national track team, like, I had a chance to go to the wind tunnel plenty of times and trying out helmets. And like, even from season to season, as my body changed shape, the helmet A wasn't as fast this year as it was last year on me. Like, it's so individual. It's unbelievable. So to say that one helmet is the same for me, who's 6'2" and 80 kilograms, and you, who's less than 80 kilograms by a significant amount, it's crazy. Yeah,
for sure. You can't make that claim that this helmet is the fastest. And it's dubious to make that claim for other products too, because the whole system has to work together.
But we're in a space where it needs some sort of independent arbiter to come in, because you can make these wild claims. Like, you see bikes that are going in fully production ready, painted up into the wind tunnel, and they're going in for testing. It's like, you're not going in for testing. Your bike is fully sprayed up and it's ready to go. There's no testing getting done here. This is a production ready bike. And then they fire like 600 different yaw angles at this bike until they get one yaw angle that it performs well under. And then that's the marketing headline, like, the fastest bike ever made. And it's like, no, that's such a bullshit claim.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways they can spin the data to make it look like it's more impressive than it actually is. The obvious one is that, testing it at a higher speed than people actually ride at will, those watt savings will just go through the roof as the speed increases. So.
You made a great point on a recent video. I'm not sure which video. It might have been your aerodynamic gravel video, where people that are slower make the judgment that maybe aero gains aren't worth it because the watt saving is significantly less, but they fail to factor in that they're going to be on course for much longer. So a smaller watt saving actually amounts to a greater overall time saving.
Yeah, so this is pretty shocking to people when I tell them, and I had some people actually message me after that video saying, I think you got the calculations wrong, and I said, no, the calculations aren't wrong. This is correct, and actually in one of Specialized's wind tunnel videos, they explain this phenomenon. But in my gravel Aero video, I talked about savings at Unbound, and I think I was talking about how going to the drops would save you 9 minutes if you go from the hoods to the drops. It would save you 9 minutes over the Unbound distance if you were going, I think it was 35 kilometers per hour. Now, 35 kilometers per hour is reasonable for the pros at Unbound, but it's not reasonable for your everyday cyclist who's just trying to finish Unbound. So that cyclist is probably doing 25 kilometers per hour. Aero, and that cyclist would probably assume aero doesn't really matter. I'm going so slow anyway. But actually, that rider would save 12 minutes over the Unbound distance. Even though they're saving far fewer watts, they're just out on the course for so much longer.
And what's the difference if someone moves down from drops onto skis, aero bars?
Yeah, so I believe that the drops were a 13 watt savings at 35 kilometers per hour over the hoods, and then going down onto aero bars was over 40 watts savings.
Holy shit, that's big.
It is big. So, it gets into this whole conversation about spirited gravel and, whether you should be running aero bars or not. I don't know. I've always just been if it's faster, I'm going to do it kind of guy. That's always been my primary consideration.
One of the wildest decisions I've seen in a long time is the decision from Unbound to, when I initially read it, I thought I read it wrong, because they stopped the pro elite riders using aero bars, but it's okay for the age groupers and, the rest of the field. I'm like, I'm sure you've had the experience of being on a group ride and someone who's a newbie triathlete comes out on the group ride on their aero bars and you're like, oh, dude, like, that's not safe. Like, don't be in the aero bars. You're a newbie. This is like pretty dangerous stuff.
Right.
And then you add in gravel to the mix. I don't think it's a great safety idea to allow newbies on aero bars on gravel, like full stop. But then to ban the only guys in the race who are arguably capable of using this equipment safely from using them. It just seems so bizarre.
So this might be a little controversial, but I will give you my opinion on that whole ruling. So the claim for banning aero bars is safety, right? So if you ban the aero bars for pros and not everyone else, you've completely thrown your safety argument out the window, because if there's anybody who's able to handle their bike on gravel with aero bars, it's the pros. And so the reality of the situation is they didn't ban aero bars for safety. They banned aero bars because certain pros were whining about the aero bars for so long that finally they just caved. They're like, all right, fine, we'll do it. We'll ban aero bars. So it really was not safety. It was just certain pros whining about it.
It's been very controversial, and it just seems like one of those subjects that keeps on and on. Was it last year Pete Stetinas sent the email to everyone prior to Unbound?
Yeah, it was. If he wanted to get something going, he should have started the email chain sooner, because I think it was like a week before the race or something. But yeah, he sent an email out to a lot of riders. I was part of the email chain, and he was saying, let's all, I don't even think he was saying let's all not do aero bars, but he was trying to get a consensus on whether we were going to use aero bars or not. Because I think Pete Stetina, he's not anti-aero bar, but he's kind of an aero bar flip-flopper, where it's like, okay, is it cool to run aero bars at this race? Okay. Oh, it's not cool. Okay, I won't run them. Whereas like people like me, it's like, if they're not against the rules and they're an advantage, they're going to be on my bike. Right. And then people like Jeff Kabush is like, I will never run aero bars ever. But anyway, so kind of the consensus after that email was that, okay, we're not going to run aero bars. But then, the Dutch Mafia, which Ivar Slick, who won the race as part of the Dutch Mafia, they didn't care. They were like, we brought our aero bars, we're going to run them. They didn't care about the spirit of gravel at all. They were just there to win the race. So Pete Stetina did end up putting these little mini aero bars on his bike. And I don't know, it's the whole thing. I didn't really chime in, to be honest with you, because I already knew I was running aero bars and I didn't care what anybody else was doing.
Gravel is changing though. And to just be stuck in the mud and refuse to change with it, I think is a little bit short-sighted. Like, there wasn't an incentive structure to look for these marginal gains 10, 15 years ago. Gravel still is a niche community. It's a niche of a niche sport. Like, let's not pretend it's, soccer or it's American football. It's still, we're playing in small corner of the world. But the incentives are starting to come. Like Lifetime Grand Prix this year, it's prize money for the first time. And then outside, I know so much was made about the prize money of that, but actually, if you broke down how much prize money there is there, it probably hardly covers your travel to the races. And it definitely didn't cover your equipment for the season.
Yeah, it's so $250,000, which is the total prize purse, sounds like a lot of money. And then you break it down, and that's split amongst 10 women and 10 men. So, that it gets to be quite a small amount. And I think the winner only takes home $25,000. I was talking to Alexei Vermeulen, who got second place in the Grand Prix last year, which means he would have won, I think, $20,000. He said he thinks his expenses for going to all the Grand Prix races and the lodging and food and all of that was probably close to $40,000. So he didn't even break even with the prize money. Now, that being said, he's making a lot of money from his sponsors. Don't get me wrong, but the prize money is less impressive when you break it down, for sure.
But what Lifetime has done, it's created this knock-on effect where now there's attention on these races.
Exactly.
The big YouTube series, there's a lot of Lifetime guys who've been on the podcast and other big podcasts. And because of that, now there's dollars coming from brands, and brands are getting behind, even Stages, Watt Bike are both sponsors on this podcast as well. And it's largely because they're seeing that pop in the whole gravel scene. So I think Lifetime, they definitely have to be commended for putting that chunk of cash in, because it's really popularized and given a lot of opportunities to, I don't say guys who couldn't have made it, but guys who would have had a difficult career path if they had a chosen world tour.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I totally commend Lifetime for what they've done. I mean, they have put so much attention on US gravel racing with the series, and take the prize money out of it. There is so much money in US gravel right now. If you're a racer that's at kind of the domestic level, you know, you're not quite World Tour on the road, or you're not quite World Cup on the mountain bike, and you're in the US and you're thinking, okay, how am I going to make the most money? Which I don't think that's how most racers think, but let's just say you're thinking that. And you're like, okay, I could do road domestically, I could do mountain bike domestically, I could do this gravel thing. It's not even a competition. I think that if you're at that domestic level in the US, gravel is where you need to be if you want to make a career out of it.
Yeah, and Europe's gone the same way. We've gravel Earth series around Europe as well now, which I think is kind of a sort of a desperate plea to copy the Lifetime Grand Prix series. Interestingly, we have more UCI involvement than you guys have in Europe. And gravel doesn't need the UCI, really. I think the UCI needs gravel at the moment. It's a weird dynamic.
I agree. Yeah, it is a bit weird. And you know, the roots of gravel racing were very much anti USA Cycling and anti UCI. So there is still that culture in it where, you know, I think that gravel racers, both pro and not pro, they don't want USA Cycling to be involved, and they don't want the UCI to be involved. And Lifetime didn't involve either one of them with this Grand Prix, and I think most people are happy about that.
Dylan, just to finish up, one of your most popular videos on YouTube, and time and again when we survey the audience on email list, the big challenge people have is they're struggling to balance multiple things in their life. By that, I mean they're struggling to balance family, work with training. And as a byproduct of struggling to balance them, weight is often something they really struggle with. And I know one of your most popular videos is around cutting weight for cyclists. What's the core information in that I know that's a couple of years old now that you would still stand by, or what's your amended version of that advice to people looking to chop a bit of weight now look like?
I think that weight loss video probably needs an update because it is a couple years old, but I haven't changed my general stance on that. I stand behind a lot of the research that supports this kind of low calorie density approach. And low calorie density just means the foods that you're eating are low in calorie density. So there's not a lot of calories in a large volume of food. And what that essentially means is that you're going to be eating unprocessed, healthier foods, which is also better for your health. These unprocessed foods are lower in calorie density. And the reason why that approach seems to work is because they just take up more, more volume and leave you more full while you're consuming less calories. And there is research to back that up. I'm not just, pulling that out of my ass there. There is research to back that up. Give people two meals. One is low calorie density, one is high calorie density. They consume more calories when they do the high calorie density. And then that turns into weight loss or weight gain down the road. So I stand by that approach. And I think that if people are counting calories or they're trying to restrict, eventually they're going to fail because it's impossible to live in a state of hunger. You can do it for a while, but
sustainability is so fashionable now and trendy, and everyone's like, oh, that eating pattern's not sustainable. And it's like, okay, well, that's cool. But also a friend of mine saving for a mortgage right now, and he saves 90% of his monthly income saving for his mortgage. That's not sustainable, but it gets a large chunk of cash saved in a short space of time, and then he can move back to a pattern that's sustainable. Is there anything wrong with a similar dietary approach where it's calorie restriction and then just going back to maintenance calories?
Well, I think it depends on what your goal is. I mean, is your goal to cut weight for a race and all you care about is being lightweight for that one race and you don't care about what your weight is afterwards? Then, I think you could make the argument for something like that. But if you want to be at a healthy weight for your entire life, you need to find something that you can maintain for your entire life. So, it depends on what your goal is what I'd say.
we've such a unique relationship in a very bad way with weight and cycling. I came up racing with a French team, and we literally have, it'd be like the FBI raiding your house. Like the director would burst in at unknown times searching for carbohydrates around the house. And like we'd be stuffing croissants into the washing machine and putting dirty clothes in on top of them. That was our hiding place. Everything, baguettes, croissants, all into the washing machine with dirty kit on top of them, and he didn't look in there. Well, a lot of that has seeped down from, French amateur level into, Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3. And you see guys who are just totally fanatical about weight.
Yeah. I mean, I've never been on a road team like that had that culture, but I've had friends who have been in that culture and in that culture right now. I did have a roommate he's a professional road racer. Right after college, we would have a competition every morning where we'd weigh ourselves and see who weighed less.
Healthy.
Yeah. And then later that day, we'd have another competition to see who rode more miles that day. So it was...
How, on the flip end of that one, how high have you played around with your carbohydrate intake per hour?
During racing?
Yeah.
I'm usually around 90 to 100 grams per hour. I know that there are riders that are pushing that beyond that. Probably something that I should play around with. If I go really high, I do start to get GI issues. So, and when you're doing that too, it is important that you've got, the optimal ratio of certain carbohydrates like maltodextrin to fructose. Because, for example, if you were to just do 100 grams per hour of straight maltodextrin, you'd be much more likely to get GI issues than if you were to have a split between the two in the optimal ratio.
And when you say you're 90 to 100 grams per hour, are you tracking that just off the food labels, or are you using the biometric sensor like Super Sapiens?
No, I'm not using Super Sapiens. I do want to get my hands on Super Sapiens. I have used a continuous blood glucose monitor, but it was not Super Sapiens, and I didn't find it that user friendly because I could only look at the data after the ride. But on that note, this is something that I bring up quite frequently on podcasts when we start talking about blood glucose monitors. Blood glucose monitor is cool, and I think there's application for it. But what I think would revolutionize training, just like the power meter revolutionized training, is if they came out with a continuous blood lactate monitor. That's what I want to see. Cool. And as soon as a continuous blood lactate monitor is available, I'm buying it. And the reason is because there would be no need to ever do an FTP test again. You could see, and you don't even need to know what your FTP is. You can just see if you're over your lactate threshold or not in real time. And you could do a zone 2 ride perfectly. It would be incredible.
Dylan, you're a gent. Really appreciate it. And yeah, sure, we'll stay in touch.